Hello everyone, my name's Lachlan and today we are going to cook some Lamingtons. So the Queen's birthday long weekend is coming up, as we all know, and a long weekend is a great excuse to cook something in the kitchen that you may not normally cook. So Lamingtons I think is a perfect option for that. So obviously we need to cook a sponge cake or a sort of vanilla style cake. We need to have some jam in the center and then obviously the chocolate sort of icing on the outside. So we'll go through all of that today, except I'm not going to make the jam. If you watched our video on scones that we did for Mother's Day a few weeks ago, I talked you through making a berry conserve or a berry jam, and I made that entirely in the steam oven. I actually have a jar left over, so no point making it. This is still fully sealed, I haven't had to open it, so I'll use that today for the Lamingtons. So I've got everything weighed out here for my cake, but the first thing that we have to do before we make the cake or start mixing it is preheat our oven. So I'm going to preheat the oven to conventional on 180 degrees. Also, what you'll have to do next is grease your tray that you'll bake the cake into. So this is basically a sliced tin. It's approximately 30 centimeters times 20 centimeters. Anything around this size will work, and ultimately it doesn't matter too much. The only difference will be maybe the slight size of your Lamington. So it's still going to taste great. There's no massive issue with what you use. But now we need to start making the mix. So grab yourself a mixing bowl, and everything here I've got weighed out ready to go, and it's also at room temperature. So that's two really important things when we bake, is that you get everything ready to go at the start. This makes your life a lot easier, and also at room temperature things will mix and emulsify better also. So I have 160 grams of unsalted butter, which I've diced, so that can go in, and 160 grams of caster sugar. I'm also going to add at this point my vanilla paste or extract. I've got about a teaspoon, I should say. So that goes on in. Make sure you scrape off every bit, even if you have to use your finger, that's okay. Now we're going to place this to our Mixmaster with a paddle attachment, which is this one. So I'll pop this in and we will get mixing, and we want to mix this until it's light and fluffy. So I'll show you the look we're going for. So you can see this mixture now, it's really nice, light and fluffy. So this is exactly what we are looking for. Now it's time to add the eggs one at a time, and we can continue beating. Okay, so that mixture's looking fantastic. Now when we add the eggs, I know this seems a little bit convoluted, but always crack your egg into a second bowl. And I always do this because if you don't, you can guarantee that you'll put shell into this mixture. Every time you crack it in here, there's never shell, but the minute you try and do it in there, half the eggshell goes with it. It's just one of those Murphy's Law situations that really stuffs you up. So crack the egg into there. I would also recommend that you grab your spatula and just scrape the bowl down before you add this egg also, just to get anything that might be on the base of this bowl up. Don't be too particular about it. Pop in this egg and mix these eggs for probably 1 to 2 minutes each before you add the next one. So this egg has been mixing now for about 2 minutes. You can see the mixture is really nice and creamy. So now we can simply grab our second egg that we've cracked into the bowl and pour it straight in. Once again, we'll give this about 2 minutes before we add the third and final egg. Okay, so you can see how nice and light and fluffy this mixture is looking. So it's really nice and creamy. Your mixture should be looking exactly like this. So if it isn't, you either need to beat the mixture longer, you may even need to scrape the sides down on the side of your bowl just to make sure it's all mixing. But once it's looking like this, we can grab our third egg, pop it in, and cook for another, or beat I should say, for another 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, so this beating part is all finished now. So you can see it's nice and light in colour. It's very creamy. You'll see this when you do this at home. Now we can take this bowl out of the mixing machine and we can start to fold in both the flour and the milk. Okay, so I've taken the bowl out of the mixing machine. I'm now just going to, before we do anything, scrape this bowl down completely. So that way when we start mixing our other ingredients, they all mix in perfectly. So hopefully, when I show this up to the camera, you can see exactly how I mean. So it's all central now in the base of the bowl. So what I have here now, I have some buttermilk and some self-raising flour. So those who know me know that I don't sift flour. I find it too time consuming, but what I do like to do is get a whisk into it and literally just whisk the flour, because that will aerate it, in my opinion, just about as good as sieving it, and it's a lot quicker. So what we need to do now is alternate between adding the flour and the milk. So using this spatula, get a good scoopful, and I'll also pour in a little bit of milk. And now I'll just mix these, just fold them in. We want to retain as much of that air as possible. So when we're folding, I basically scoop around with my spatula and almost let it fall on top. I'm going to add a bit more milk. Now, if you don't have buttermilk, you can actually just add a bit of acid to some milk, whether that be a vinegar, a lemon juice, or anything like that. Let that sit for about 15 to 20 minutes and the milk will start to go a bit lumpy, it'll start to curdle and look a little bit funny, but you'll get very similar properties to what buttermilk is. But if you have some buttermilk, we only need about 160 or 170 mils for this recipe. Whatever's left over, you can make some scones, so even better. So I'm just folding this all through now. As you can see, I'm going to add the rest of the milk and the rest of my flour. So we start off a little bit slower, then towards the end you can really just throw it all in pretty much. Just make sure that you continue to fold and you don't get too excited and start to beat this too hard, as you'll lose some air and you'll just get a tougher cake. But this should go quite nice and creamy in colour and look like a really good butter cake essentially. So your mix will look like that basically. So this will be very active with the self-raising flour, so it will want to rise a lot. Let's grab our cake tin that we've pre-greased and lined. Grab this mixture and just plonk it in. So expect this to rise a fair bit. Now this will rise because of the self-raising flour, number one, but also the more you beat your eggs, your butter and your sugar, therefore the more air you have incorporated, and that will also help to generate a nice rise. So you should get pretty light cakes at the end, and if you don't, there's a few things that it might have happened that's gone wrong. That could be overbeating the flour or underbeating the eggs essentially. Okay, so now just with the back of the spatula, just try push this out as evenly as you can. I wouldn't be too pedantic about it because we will be cutting this into shapes for the Lamingtons, but if it's a nice even slab, that'll just make life easier and it'll cook even as well. Now, if this is a little bit tricky, you can even get some spray oil and spray the back of a spoon. That will mean your spoon doesn't stick to your batter and it will give you a really smooth layer. I try to avoid that, but there's no issues if you do need to. Scrape that back and away we go. So now we can pop this into the oven. This will probably take 20 to 25 minutes, but that will vary depending on the size tin you use. This one might be closer to 20 because it's a little bit bigger, but if you have a smaller tin, then your mixture will be more dense and therefore the cook time will be longer. So gauge as you go. You might need to test it with a skewer or a knife or something, but once this is cooked, I'll show you good ways to test the cake. So in this goes, and in 20-25 minutes, we'll have a nicely cooked cake. So I'm going to place the cake on shelf level 2 onto the rack, and then I will set a timer for 25 minutes. Okay, 25 minutes on the dot. My oven is finished. The door's open for me, so it's not going to overcook. Have a look at this. Beautiful color, golden brown. So here we go. I'm very happy with this. As I said, it's nice and golden brown. There's no cracking on top. Beautiful even color. This is ticking all the boxes so far. So just to test if it's cooked, I'm just gonna press this and it's bouncing straight back up. So I don't even need to grab a knife or a skewer for this. I just know that it's cooked exactly as it should be. What I need to do now is I need to let this cool down in the tin for about 10 minutes before flipping it out onto a cooling rack. Once it cools completely, I can then cut this into the sizes and put the jam inside. I am super confident though that everyone watching this, you can get your cake looking exactly the same, both in color and evenness. And as I said, follow those easy instructions. We're halfway there to getting a really nice Lamington. I'll come back shortly and we can do the next steps. Okay, so our cake has been on the bench now for a good hour or so. It's nice and cool. It's at room temperature, so that's exactly what we're looking for. So now just lift that up and pop it onto a chopping board. So a few things that we'll need for this step. Grab yourself a bowl for the offcuts, so you can pop them into that. Ideally, if you have a ruler, that will help us get nice even squares. This isn't really necessary, but it's nice to get them nice and uniform. And you will need a bread knife also. So the first thing that I do is just eyeball it, get this nice and square. So cut off these end pieces. And this doesn't have to be perfect, but it's just making it easier for the next step. So I'm probably cutting 1 centimetre off both ends. And the reason for that is the sides don't rise quite as much as in the centre. So this will mean that the finished Lamington will be nice and square, ideally. Okay, excellent. Now, using the ruler, I want to try and cut this into 5 centimetre squares if I can. Obviously you can make this whatever size you want. So what I normally do is I mark the top of the cake at 5, and I will do the bottom of the cake at 5, then line that up and just cut it through. So I've got a nice piece of cake there. Now the easiest part is to then pick that cake up, line up the edge, and then pop your knife next to that and cut that nice and square also. So this means you don't need to keep fumbling around with the ruler, and you can continue on to do this. So I've done that now, and I have a piece which is a little bit narrower. That's okay though, because we'll just make a few smaller Lamingtons, so that's all good. Now that this is all cut, I simply once again measure 5 centimetres. This one I only really measure the once because it's easier to manage. And that is a piece of cake that's nice and square. And I'll continue this until I have a bunch of 5 centimetre squares. Okay, so I have all of my pieces of cake now, and now it's really up to you with how you approach it. You can either cut a piece directly in half like so, and you'll have quite a small Lamington, and that's good in terms of no wastage. Or if you want bigger ones, marry up 2 pieces. Now what I have is 2 pieces of cake that aren't exactly the same size, or maybe on top of the cake, it slightly curves over. So to manage that, if you want to be really fussy, you can square off that cake. Now this of course gives you more wastage, so that's the less ideal part. But then, once I square this one off, we've got 2 pieces of cake that sit on top of each other really nice. It's pretty square, it's not perfect. Maybe if I go this way, there we go, that's heaps better. So have a play around. I would line all of these pieces up together, get the 2 halves and stack them on top of each other. Maybe pop them back onto your rack so it's out of the way. Once you have them all how you would like, we would then pop the jam in them, and then we actually have to freeze them before we glaze them. Okay, so these are all cut and squared off as you can see, so I'm going to get roughly a dozen or so Lamingtons. Some of my jam left over, as I said, from the scones the other week. I'm going to use a palette knife, which is, I just prefer it because it's got a slightly cranked handle. When I do this, be very gentle because the cake, because it's so fresh, there will be lots of crumbs that could potentially leak out. So just gently jam the center, be pretty generous. So, because you want to see this when you break open the finished Lamington. And now I'll just pop that lid on top, like so. And that's all you have to do. So I'm going to continue this until my whole bunch of Lamingtons is done, and then I'll pop them into the freezer. Okay, so those cakes, they are jammed and now they're in the freezer, just so they firm up. Whilst they are cooling down or setting, we need to make our chocolate glaze. So here I have water, sugar, it's over, just normal caster sugar, some cream, and some cocoa powder. And all of these will be in the recipe on our website. So I'm gonna pop this into a pot like so, and I'm going to bring this up to pretty much a boil on induction setting 8. And we need to really make sure that we do bring this to a boil and then we do cook it out for 2 to 3 minutes or so. If we don't do that, when you taste this glaze, you'll actually taste the raw cocoa, and we all know what that tastes like. It's not the nicest thing to experience. So if we can cook that out, it'll be a lot more clean on the palate and it'll be a much tastier Lamington. So I'll get this on. Once this comes to the boil after 2 or 3 minutes, I'll turn it off, and then all we have to do is allow this to cool down completely before we can glaze the Lamingtons. So we'll just turn the cooktop on and pop this onto induction setting 8. And I'll just whisk this as it comes to the boil. And make sure to break up all those bits of cocoa. This will come to the boil extremely quickly, in probably, I don't know, 3 minutes or so, depending on the size of your pot. And as I said, we'll boil it for 2 minutes, and that's all we have to do. But as you'll see, this is starting to get shinier. And once this reaches full temperature, it'll go really nice and glossy, and you'll see a nice reflection on the glaze. Okay, so you can see this is really nice and bubbly. It's almost like lava. So it's been bubbling now for a good couple of minutes. This is done now, I can switch it off. And now I'm going to pour this into a bowl, but just to be safe, I'm going to pour it through a sieve, just in case there's any lumps. So I have my bowl and my sieve lined up here. I'll just pick up this pot, pour that through the sieve like so. This will also help to cool it down a bit quicker too. So now, I'm just going to let this cool down, because we want this really cold before we glaze the Lamingtons. So this should work out quite well, because by the time this cools down, our Lamingtons will be nice and set in the freezer, so it's all going to tie in nicely. If you want, you can speed this up by popping this in the fridge as well. Just be careful that it doesn't set too much, because it can be then difficult to set your Lamingtons. So I'll come back shortly, we'll finish it off, I'll get some coconut ready as well, and then the job's done. Okay, so we are now all ready to go for the final piece of the puzzle. I've got my Lamington cakes here, which are nice and set from the freezer. My chocolate glaze is at a nice cool temperature, and then obviously I've got some coconut. So this can all get a little bit messy, so it's important to have everything set up nicely, and we'll try and work in a bit of a production line. So we'll pop our cake into the chocolate, then into the coconut, and try and keep it as clean as possible. Now, I've actually got some skewers, or some tweezers I should say, but a skewer works really well, or a fork, so you can hold onto it but not have to use your fingers. And then you may need a spoon. So I'm going to pop a spoon into my glaze just to be on the safe side, and then also a spoon into my coconut so I can flick it on top. So I'm just going to glaze these Lamingtons, drain off the excess, spin it as you drain it, like I am now. You get a really nice even coating. And I'm going to hold this over another bowl as I sprinkle the coconut over. This way, it keeps my coconut in the bowl as clean as possible, and then you get really nice, clean looking Lamingtons. And then onto your tray. Get another fork, push it off, and I'll just sprinkle a bit of coconut over that piece. So that's all you have to do. Take your time, because the last thing you want to do is get all of this work and then when you go to finish them off, they don't look good. So please take your time, because it's awfully satisfying when they look nice and clean. I'll continue to work away here and then we'll have a finished tray of Lamingtons. Okay, so we're on the last one now. They're looking really great, I must admit. So just make sure when you do this, drain off all of that excess glaze as well. If there's too thick glaze, when you pour on the coconut, it'll just fall off. The weight, the weight of the coconut combined with that excess glaze, it won't be strong enough to hold on. So this last one here, I'm going to just sprinkle this over the top. And my job here is done. So we need to let these sit for about 5 to 10 minutes, maybe even pop them into the fridge to let that glaze firm up even more, so that way you can stack them up really nicely on a platter or something. They freeze fantastic as well. You can either freeze them before glazing them or after, like they are now. Completely up to you. So that really is all there is to it. The cake is easy, the glaze is easy, cutting it is easy. So all the steps are easy. We just need to make sure to be patient and you'll get fantastic results. So if you want to follow this recipe, hop on board to mieleexperience.com.au or mieleexperience.co.nz. We'll have the recipe there, all the measurements, all the instructions. So I've got no doubt that this long weekend, you will be able to make these just like this. And as I said, it's a good excuse to make them. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.